Welcome to another PRO Talks podcast. Today we will chat with Nick Connor about a recent roundtable the PR office held with MP Gareth Davies, Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. The PR office convened the minister with policy shapers, VCs and scale-up leaders from across the UK, including a healthy contingent of experts from the north, I should add. And while our roundtable was held under Chatham House rule, there can't be a better person placed at the intersection of political communication, tech scale-up and VC funding than Nick to talk us through the main themes that arose. So, Nick, we're swiftly approaching the budget, which makes now an important time for tech and fundraising pros to engage with ministers such as Gareth Davies. Can you give us an overview of the main themes from the roundtable and perhaps also the sorts of themes that we will now see reoccurring in press in the run-up to the budget as well?
What a great introduction, and you're making me sound like an expert, which on the body of the people we had in the room, I certainly weren't. It was so impressive, the contributions everyone made. I think the general feeling, and we've done a few of these events now, and with Labour, with the Conservatives, but the general feeling from everyone is politicians are saying the right things, but are they delivering through? So the ambition to make the UK a science superpower is great, and there's widespread praise for the way the UK is great at inventing things, and it's great at inventing things because there's a lot of investment, lots of venture capital going into early stage companies, and this is really backed up by the EIS tax incentives. Now, there's a problem in the UK where we're great at inventing things, but not so good at scaling them up into global superpowers. So one of the key themes at this roundtable this week really was looking at how they can transfer things like the EIS scheme into helping scale-ups. So the government recently announced, and Gareth Davies, who was our speaker, who's the exec from the Treasury, recently announced the Mansion House Venture Capital Compact, in other words, the agreement where the government has made some reforms to make it easier for pension pots to invest into venture schemes. Now, it's great. That's released a load of money. Question is, and this is the question raised at the roundtable, is how are they going to free up that money so investors can actually get it into the companies? Now, one of the things is there some incentives like the EIS scheme where it makes it worthwhile and the risk is offset within the tax system for investors to lend larger amounts of money to fast growth companies in the science and technology space. But that wasn't the only thing we discussed, and I'll just go over a few points, what other people are talking about. And, as you mentioned in your opener, Nuala, there was a lot of speakers from the north. So we had a good cohort from Liverpool. We had investors focusing the Northern Powerhouse who were based in Manchester, as well as, sort of contributions from people from Yorkshire, Cambridge, Wales, and the odd Ukrainian dotted in for good measure. Some of the things, looking from a more regional picture, is how institutions such as the Business Bank and the UK Infrastructure Bank are posed to co-invest, and how this could be improved, because there's certain pots of money these institutions can invest, particularly in the regions, but there needs to be much more incentives, again going back to that word, to get private money to go alongside it and make it easier. But this all makes it sort of the desire for many, particularly with the levelling up agenda, about trying to diversify the UK economy away from the golden triangle. And nothing was more pressing than actually the infrastructure outside Oxford, Cambridge and London for things like data centres, which are critical to the AI revolution, where they need more power to actually make them work. And the amount of power they use is in competition with me and you and households. So there needs to be a thinking from the government, sort of strategic thinking, whichever government that may be in a year to 5 years' time, of saying, okay, AI revolution is here. That uses a lot of power. Yes, we need to heat and power homes, but equally we need to power things like data centers to allow technology to exist.
Well, thank you, Nick. I think you probably answered half of the questions I had planned to ask you, but that's obviously a fantastic start. So let's just go back up to the north of England and look again at the impact of devolution on the likes of the VCs and startups and scale-ups that convened with MP Gareth Davies at your roundtable, and all the conversations surrounding levelling up, particularly with Liverpool's startup community, South Yorkshire's innovation district. Are we going to see these sorts of particular hotspots named in the budget? Can you give us a bit more of an idea about the sorts of signals that these particular ecosystems might be looking out for in the next couple of weeks?
No, that's a good question. We're bound to see something in there from the Leaven Up agenda, and particularly looking in the post HS2 world, where there is a pool of money which has been earmarked to be spent within the northern regions, which was going to be on railways and the land around it. Now, question is, in the run-up to election, how much of that is going to be into infrastructure, into the tech industry? Now, what I find fascinating is how different tech is seen in, let's say, Liverpool, let's say Sheffield, where actually I see it almost being more valuable in some sense, where it's applied technology, right? So where you're seeing the Golden Triangle, these bright, amazing ideas which change the world, and they're probably first generation ideas coming out. But when we start seeing companies in a former industrial site, is actually how can we apply these into industry? And I think that's really exciting. Now, there's so many issues and ways where we need to develop these hubs so they can take on these sort of AI revolution, or robotics, or advanced materials, or semiconductors, whatever it may be. But will we see it in the budget? I don't think so. I think this budget's all about voters, particularly those voters who are, let's say, baby boomers, so in their 60s, and what matters to them. So I don't think we can see much on industry. I'm sure we will see stuff about leveling up, but I think it's going to be much more short-termism about potentially about jobs and things which really matter to everyday people at the moment. This is what we need, and this is where the conversations we had with Gareth was so important, and we will have with the Labour Party equally, is we need some more long-term thinking, some more strategic plans, and I don't think we're going to hear that in the next budget.
Okay, so let's go back to some of the points that you made at the beginning there surrounding the Chancellor's Mansion House reform package, which we all know was unveiled some 3 months ago. During the roundtable, there was a lot of positive chatter about the VC compact and why new investment vehicles should be encouraged to assemble and propose themselves to government. We've already seen the likes of the UK Infrastructure Bank and British Business Bank adopting different investment methodologies to essentially open up their pools of capital to the most promising scale-ups that the country has. We've seen vehicles like Northern Gritstone also warrant optimism and very actively begin to invest in some really exciting companies. Do you think that now represents an opportune time for financiers or potential financiers to take advantage of the Mansion House reforms and really change the game and do things differently for British industry?
Absolutely. So I think every venture capital fund should be looking at this pool of money. But, and I will say but, and I will say it as a devil advocate, why would they at the moment? So one of the facts and figures the government always says about the UK is we're the highest amount of VC money in Europe. We're the biggest tech hub when it comes to raising capital. But if you look where that's deployed, it tends to be very, let's say, software, fintech based, mainly at early stage. The only sort of if you read between the headlines, particularly with sort of the neobanks, sort of your um, new age digital banks, a lot of their capital raising is actually to do with the regulations of where they have to have capital ratios. In other words, they have enough money in the background when they lend money out. So it's a bit distorted figure, and this is why we need to address it. So there's potentially some money coming in through the pension pots from the VC compact, which is great. Next question is actually that needs to be deployed into scale ups and really focused on companies which can turn into what they call unicorns or billion-dollar valuation companies, and really making sure that these companies stay in the UK. Now, there's some serious issues they need to address before that happens. I think incentives, I've said before, EIS is a fantastic scheme because it offsets the risks through the tax system for investors. I think something like that moving forward for larger scale investment would work. I think there's some issues here about future for companies. Why would they accept this money when they could potentially gain more money from the US or Asia? And there's some real issues around IP, intellectual property. So when companies take intellectual property, it's currently in the UK, but if they take money from South Korea, the US, Malaysia, wherever it may be, they may have to transfer that IP. So the question is, can we able to give the level of investment to convince companies staying in the UK, but also give those guarantees to the businesses that you can stay in the UK. It's a safe place to grow your business because we can gauge this money, because the benefit for us is in that intellectual property.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think reshoring IP is something that we focus on a lot here across the teams at the PR office. So that will be something that we will see and we will drill down into in future events to come this year. I do like your use of the future unicorns comments. I saw someone call them soonicorns in tech press this morning, which made me feel slightly queasy, but I suppose it makes the point. So making another point, this was a word that kept coming up throughout the whole of the meeting, and is something that we focus again on a lot, is the issue of infrastructure. So let's go back to what you were saying about power and grid connectivity and the headaches that causes for you and me, for homeowners, for house builders, for data centers, for advanced electronics scale-ups. It's even been raised by the power providers themselves at this point. Do you think that this is something that government could seek to problem solve within the next coming weeks?
No.
Oh dear.
And I'll tell you why.
Then.
I'll tell you why. Because if you look at semiconductors, the microchips, which are used for AI. So let me give you an example. So if I did a search on Google and I did that same search on ChatGPT, sort of, where is Sheffield? If I type that into Google and I type that into ChatGPT, to use ChatGPT, that search would use 40% more power. So going down the phone line into that data center, that microchip, which is doing that search, uses 40% more power. So it's a lot more powerful AI, but also uses a lot more energy. Now, we have seen this last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of announcements, and we could see some announcements in the budget about UK's energy. I mean, I'm talking right at the core end of making energy. So be it nuclear power plants, offshore wind, etc., etc. I suspect we will hear some announcements because there's been a bit of a dripping worth of announcements. I'm from North Wales, and we've talked about our new nuclear power plants come out this week. So we'll see about that, the core end, but it's how we get that electricity into the grid. And to be honest, there's so much which needs to be done. There almost needs to be a whole strategic thinking about replanning how we distribute energy in this country. Not only energy security, but once we've got that energy, how we give it to homes, how we give it to businesses, advanced manufacturing to old-fashioned manufacturing. Everyone needs electricity, and it's how we give that electricity to the country. And it's actually something I know, Nuala, you and a lot of the team here at PR Office are having lots of conversations with, and it's something, we think is going to be a key theme going for the next couple of years.
Well, I admire your honesty. The short answer is as good as a long answer if you can be definitive and say, nope, we're not going to fix that in the next few weeks. But yes, look, agree with you. It's impacting all of us, from paying our bills to some of the aged infrastructure in UK industrial PLC that we've seen facing mothballs in the near future, which is another thing in itself. So to wrap up then, perhaps we can look at how that founder, embroiled in the boardroom somewhere, running from meeting to meeting, managing a small team, is able to interact with government as a whole. How do they get the right minister in the right place at the right time to appreciate what it is that they're working so tirelessly to do, and how they're trying to interact with financiers on top of that in order to push through the sorts of innovation that this country hopes to be known for?
So almost to reverse your question, if I may, Nuala, and as you mentioned, the event was under Chatham House rules, so I won't attribute this comment, but one of our panelists last week mentioned that there isn't a board meeting that goes by where his board of directors, who's a wide range of venture capital stakeholders, who are saying, why are you staying in the UK? Now, he's not alone, and I know a number of founders who I've spoken to all around the country are saying the same things. So, great, you got this invention, you've spun out of a university, fantastic, well done. Can you grow this in the UK? Now, everyone thinks they can, they want to, but when the reality strikes, there's a lot of barriers, and these barriers, one, are fundraising. Can they raise enough capital? Two is, well, that capital comes with conditions. Conditions is, can you get enough power from the grid? Simple one. If no, the funders go, well, we'll give you the money, but you clearly can't do it in the UK. You need to go elsewhere. So my strategic advice is to companies is, you need to keep talking to our stakeholders. You've got a nice home in Liverpool, Cambridge, Manchester, Sheffield. You want to stay there, you want to grow your company locally, you can do that, but you need to be talking to the right people. And as I said at the top, be it Labour, be it Conservative, they're listening, they appreciate everything you're doing, but they need to know the details, because they can make grand gestures about turning UK into science and technology superpower by 2030. They agree, everyone agrees that'd be a wonderful thing, but they need to know the barriers. And there is the will, cross-party will, so it doesn't matter who's the government in a year's time, to make these changes and to make things easier. But you need to tell them. And best way to do is engage with the channels of conversation, as we had at this roundtable. And it's something we can certainly help with, be it speaking to politicians or speaking to politicians via the media, which is also quite good, because you also speak to investors, potential investors, at the same time. But there's plenty of ways we can help. And if you guys ever wanted to have a chat, Nuala and myself are available to talk through how we do it and how we can work with companies like yourself.
Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate the overview, and we'll look forward to hearing from you again in a couple of weeks' time once the budget lands, hopefully with a positive surprise here or there in the process.
Thank you, Nuala.